it's Summer, creator of SummerSunHomeArt. You're watching this probably because you want to paint something beautiful with watercolor, but are struggling to figure out things like how much water to use, how much paint to use, how to control the paint to go the way you want, or how to prevent the paper from buckling. In this free class, I'm going to show you 3 secrets to frustration-free watercolor. You're going to learn super simple tips and tricks that will instantly boost your control of this beautiful art medium and make your painting process both relaxing and fun. Without further ado, let's get started. Secret number 1. Control the amount of water in your brush. This is to me the number 1 most important and challenging part. If you know how much water should go into your brush, and you can accurately adjust the amount throughout a painting, you are probably halfway done here. Let's dive into 2 common mistakes when it comes to the wetness of your brush. Mistake number 1, having too much water. When there's too much water in the brush, 2 things will likely happen. 1, you're going to create a puddle on the paper, and your paint will be floating and moving around, making it very difficult to control. And 2, I'm pretty sure we all have experienced this, your paper will slowly buckle up. So basically in all circumstances, we don't want the brush to be too saturated with water. And to prevent that, here is a simple trick. If there's too much water, you can simply press your brush against the edge of your palette to squeeze off some of the liquid and continue to mix the color, add paint as needed until the wetness and color feels right to you. Now, what if you accidentally put down too much water on the paper? Well, same trick here. Just press your brush against the edge of your palette or your cleaning jar, and now you're turning your brush into a very soft sponge. And when you dab it on the water pool you created, it'll lift off some water but not too much. Okay, now you may ask, why can't I just use a tissue or towel to make my brush a little bit drier? Well, I don't recommend using them when you are adjusting colors because 1, chances are you're going to get too much water stripped away from the brush, so you're making your brush a little bit too dry. And 2, you're going to lose a lot of pigment. So basically it's a waste of paint and you have to remix your color all over again. Of course, tissues, towels, or even a dry clean brush can be very helpful in many situations. For example, if you want to create a highlight, or if you made a mistake and you want to erase it, then use these more absorbent tools. But keep in mind, you don't always want to lift off that much moist. Sometimes using the edge of your palette or your jar to make your brush less saturated may be a better choice. Okay, that's having too much water in the brush. Now let's move on to the second mistake, which is having not enough water in the brush. Have you ever tried to create an even smooth wash but ended up with streaky strokes? Well, that's probably because you did not have enough water in your brush or your paint is too thick. Here is a simple trick to fix that. Always, mix your paint with some water on the palette before moving on to the paper. Do not paint directly from your paint pan. Now you may ask, what if I want my color to be super vibrant and intense? Well, in that situation, you still need to dilute the paint a little bit. Just make sure you don't add too much water to it. And a simple trick to prevent that is after you dip your brush in the water, gently squeeze your brush against the rim of the jar so that your brush is still wet but not saturated. Then you mix the paint with your slightly wet brush on the palette. Okay, to wrap up secret number 1, When it comes to how much water should go into your brush, two important takeaways. One, always avoid too much water. Make use the edge of your palette or the rim of your jar to get rid of excessive water from the brush while keeping it still wet but not saturated. And the second thing to keep in mind is, unless you want to create some special dry brush effects, most of the time you want to avoid a super dry brush. And to ensure that, always mix your paint with at least some water very well on your palette. Try these tricks and I guarantee your paper won't buckle and you won't get those ugly streaks in your wash next time. Okay, now let's move on to secret number 2. Monitor the wetness of your paper, aka choose the right moment to add paint. The wetness of your paper is super important because it affects how your paint will act on it. You might have experienced this. When you add paint to a wet area, the paint spreads a little bit too much than you expected. Well, this is probably because you are adding paint too early when you should have waited for the paper to dry a little bit more. Okay, let's say this time you wait 30 minutes. When you come back trying to add a new layer, your paint barely moves at all when you wanted it to blend a little bit. Well, that's because your base layer is too dry and your second layer was added too late. See, that's why it's important to pay close attention to the wetness of your paper throughout your painting so that you add layers at right moments. Okay, sounds a little bit tricky, right? Don't worry, here are a few simple tips that can help you tackle this. Tip number 1. Know your goal and plan ahead. Depending on what effects you want to achieve, you actually wait for different moments to add paint. For example, if your goal is to achieve clear boundaries between layers, like this, then each time when you are about to add a new layer, you will want to make sure that your previous layer is completely dry. But if your goal is to create a nice smooth transitions between washes, then the best time to add a new wash is when the last wash is almost dry, but not completely dry. Okay, so how do you know how wet your paper is? Well, sometimes it's just obvious, but sometimes it can be very hard to tell, especially when the water sinks in the paper a little bit. If that's the case, you can either lower your eye level or take your paper off the table so that you can see it from the side. Right here on the left, I see a strong reflection, kind of shiny surface, whereas on the right, I see a slight sheen. So now I can tell the left area is wetter than the right. And you can experiment with this yourself. Put down different amount of water on the paper, add some paint to see how it acts so differently on different surfaces. And later you can add the nuance of changing the wetness of your brush and see how the wetness of your brush and the wetness of your paper can interact with each other in determining the effect you're gonna get. These exercises are actually very important and can tremendously help you better understand how watercolor works. So I highly recommend doing this in your spare time. Okay, let's review secret number 2. The wetness of your paper is crucial. It's one of the keys that determines how your paint will act. Before you paint, you want to know the effects you want to achieve so that you have a rough idea about how many layers there will be and when to add each layer. So pay close attention to how wet your paper is, and that's one of the keys to successful watercolor. Okay, last secret. Hair dryer is your best friend. So I asked my Instagram followers to tell me their biggest struggle with watercolor, and here is one of the most common complaints that I got, which is I don't have the patience to wait for my layers to dry. I was actually quite shocked because it's so easy to overcome. You just need a hairdryer. Now, I do have to say that you need to be careful. If not used properly, it can actually ruin your artwork. And here are some of my tips. Number 1, set your hairdryer on a warm or low mode. This is necessary when you have a lot of water on your paper because if you use a high hot mode, it can blow your paint away and leave very odd watermarks when everything is dry. Number 2, hold your hairdryer at a distance from your artwork and keep it moving in a circular motion so that the wind is distributed evenly. Okay, so those are all my 3 secrets. Congratulations! I hope you try them all in your next watercolor painting, and I'm pretty sure it will help. Thank you so much for watching and hope to talk to you soon.